Welcome everybody to the SPADA Masterclass today. I'm going to make this very brief, but firstly I just want to thank our friends at the Australia New Zealand Screen Association for supporting this session to happen. And I'll hand over to our host for the day, Jill Macnab.
Thank you, Ness. Kia ora koutou katoa. Thanks for joining us. We're all delighted to be here, if in various stages of nervous, to talk to you all and give away all of our secrets. So I'm just going to introduce everybody first. So we have Luke Murray here, who is the theatrical booker for Madman, who have distributed many of the New Zealand films released through this year. Kerry Warkia, who is producer extraordinaire at Brown Sugar Apple Grunt and was the producer of The Legend of Barontoa, which released in February this year, just prior to everything going crazy. David White, the writer and director of This Town, which released in October. You can clarify in a minute. And Jasmin McSweeney from the Film Commission, head of marketing, who has a lot to contribute in terms of their response this year and how things have changed and been different. So, I mean, any of you that are here for specific answers on distribution and how it's going and what's happening, we're going to try and help you as best as we can. Please put any questions you have into the chat. We will be having a Q&A session at the end and hopefully we'll answer questions as we go, but if you have anything pressing, just chuck it into the chat, ask away, and we'll have a 10-15 minute session at the end as well to answer anything that hasn't been wrapped up yet. Alrighty, so first of all, I'm gonna click over to David, I think, who's just gonna give us a brief rundown of This Town. So go for it, David.
Yeah, so as Jill said, I was the writer, director and a producer on This Town, which was a comedy. It was released August 6th. And it was moved, it was meant to be April 30th, I think, and then it was moved, again because of Tenant, and then it was moved, it was moved a lot. We were the first New Zealand film to release into New Zealand cinemas after the first lockdown. We had one weekend of all of the cinemas, and then on the Tuesday after opening weekend, we lost Auckland because we went into second lockdown. So that was a nail-biting moment for, I think, Luke, well, in fact, just the entire team, because we had no idea how it was going to go. And our percentages went up and down and then stabilized, and then we went up. In week 3, it was like a very crazy ride. We were the highest grossing film other than Trolls after that as well, until Tenant came out. So it was quite a, in the cinemas, I mean, the theaters, the cinemas, that's what we talk about those people. We've got a lot of anecdotal conversations that we'll share throughout about how much they were hurting and about how films like this and then Savage and then other New Zealand films really helped them pay their bills. And then I think that's about it, actually, from me. Oh, and then 40% of our audience, it was their first film back since lockdown. So it's like it showed how many people weren't going to cinemas before that film as well.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Kerry, how about Barontoa?
Rabian, name blomi Kerry Warkia, place blo sai blo papa, place blomi Raluana Rabau. Na on my mother's side, I'm Patterson Clan from Glasgow. Thanks for having me here. Kia ora koutou katoa. Yeah, so The Legend of Barontoa is the film that I've most recently produced, and that came out late February when COVID was sort of heading this way, which wasn't great because then we went into lockdown in March, I think was the first lockdown. And in Australia, we opened on a Thursday and all the cinemas shut down on Friday. So that was pretty much our experience of COVID with our film, which was really disappointing. And you know, I do want to kind of keep everything in perspective for myself, though, because as much as that was a disappointment and we are talking about this film, it was much more important that people were safe and that, you know, the country did go into lockdown and other countries did. And yeah, so I kind of have that in perspective. But yeah, definitely, I think that it was painful. It was a painful process.
What was most painful about it?
I think that we probably didn't have another shot at theatrical with that film this year, in New Zealand anyway. I mean, we're very lucky to have a US theatrical. The film was picked up by Gravitas Ventures, and so that's happening. But the world is still being impacted on by COVID. You know, cinemas are being, some are closing down. There is so much to consider in terms of the varying degrees of how cinema has been impacted by COVID, from theatrical releases to festivals to, you know, what people are watching online. But I think that was probably the hardest thing to take, was that we probably wouldn't get another shot at that in this territory.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Just through the course of this talk, we're going to talk through broader marketing and what's happened and what's changed there, the business model itself and what's happening with theatrical and VOD and the different ancillary rights. And the international side of things, what's happened in Australia, what's happened internationally with film festivals, sales agents, all of those things. So we'll cover all of those bases, but just to focus on those films at the moment, I suppose, look, how much did those date changes affect you and the Madman team?
Well, I mean, quite a lot. We were moving films constantly. I guess especially around This Town is Savage, we had a lot of problems because every time Tenet moved, it would move by 2 weeks. And you know, we were consistently trying to like get both of those films away from Tenet.
Yeah, absolutely, because it was the one big release of the year, or the second half of the year, that was guaranteed to come, and so you didn't want to be sitting on the same release date as that.
Yeah, so I mean, especially with Savage, we were really sort of hemmed in because I mean, we never expected to release 3 New Zealand films in 3 months. It just happened that we had to do that because of, you know, the way everything came together and COVID. You'd never sort of planned to do that, but I mean, Savage was definitely very problematic because we had 2 weeks and then school holidays, and a film like Savage is not going to get a lot of run through school holidays
in normal circumstances.
Yeah, well, even in these circumstances, people were sort of throwing bizarrely, you know, odd straight to DVD film, like kids' titles into that window, and the chains were taking them, so it got affected regardless.
Yeah, and Jazz, what about you from the Film Commission's perspective? How much have things changed for you this year in terms of planning and, I suppose, P&A spends and things like that? Have you seen things look quite different to normal?
Yeah, quite a significance, and obviously distributors need a lot more support from the Film Commission in terms of P&A grants. We were in the process of changing the P&A grants and the way that they worked. We were moving VPFs. We were all cheering because last year we thought VPFs were going to be done, which is the virtual print fee, which takes up an awful lot of the release budget. And then COVID hit, and so we're looking at that savings that we thought that we could channel more money into marketing. We were just ending up using to support distributors in the release of the film, because it was tough. It was tough with the effect that the US content had on New Zealand films, alongside the fact that cinemas weren't opening every day at the same hours that we were used to, so they limited their hours when they first opened, was that we didn't have the numbers of people coming through the cinemas, and we couldn't trailer. We couldn't have the posters in there. We couldn't get that access to people to be aware that New Zealand films were there. So we had to be really agile and pivot quite quickly. The board of the Film Commission agreed to put in quite a substantial amount of more money in to support New Zealand films and release, which we were really thankful for. And we've also had to look at, because we lost trailers, which was the #1 way that people find out about New Zealand films, we had to look at other platforms for us to be able to make sure that people were aware that these films were in release, and you know, the audiences knew that they were there. So television advertising, radio reporting, they were all really important. When this town released, we did an exit survey to see how people had found out that this town was in there, and we saw in those results that television was a really important part of that. And we've continued to we've just completed,
just to put that in context, normally trailers would be the #1 thing.
Normally #1.
Yeah. People
Normally
say
#1.
that's what's brought them to the cinemas, but this year it's been completely different.
So we'd expect it to be trailers #1, and then word of mouth #2, and then we would drop down into TVs or reviews or radio spots, and we saw that it had flipped and television had become the #1 way. So that adds money to the cost of a release. Television advertising is not cheap, and it has to be carefully planned out and, you know, strategized. So yeah. So
did I suppose this question for Luke as well, and everybody, did you find that advertising costs went down a little bit, at least, because maybe bigger brands weren't advertising as they normally would have been, so the overall costs might have actually remained the same, or is that not true?
I didn't see that. Did you, Luke?
Yeah, I mean, you can get better spots.
Yeah,
we got.
But you're still paying.
We got really good value because we were going in, like, there weren't advertising. Like, I know the price that we paid, and then our dollar figure was quadruple on its rate card. Like, it was pretty crazy, and we were getting 60-second spots, like, on the news, you know, and that's pretty amazing to have that kind of exposure. But that's also because, you know, those advertising were pulling all their dollars. All those big brands were pulling dollars. So I think it's kind of a lucky situation for us in a weird way, but also unlucky. Because I think one of the things that's quite interesting around the Tenet moving is that we actually wanted to go after Tenet, not because of the trailering, but to remind people they could go back to the cinema. So it was like a constant conversation between Luke and Andrew and our team about, hey, we want to go after a Mulan, we want to go after a Tenet, because that creates the ability for people to remind them, because then we're using their advertising dollars to remind them to go back to the cinema. But in fact, for us, it was like, this tiny little New Zealand film reminding you to go back to the cinema, which is much harder. And then the extra money from the Film Commission and that TV advertising was incredibly helpful. Otherwise, who knows?
Well,
yeah,
totally vital.
Normally in New Zealand, we have a very high rate of people going to the cinema, right? I think it's around about 4 times a year, which is the average for people to go in New Zealand, which doesn't seem like a lot to all of us who are in the industry, but actually that's massive in the majority of the world. So we are lucky in that way. But yeah, if people haven't been to the movie since January or February, then trying to get them back in has been a big issue there. So what else from the exit surveys, Jazz? Was there anything else that you were quite surprised by?
We were surprised at the confidence that people were happy to be back in cinemas. So people are feeling really positive. We asked a few COVID questions about what were they nervous about going back into cinemas, and they were most nervous. They were most concerned about the changing release dates, and and not being sure what was going to release. There was some concern, but not a majority of concern around hygiene in the cinemas. So everyone was really pleased to be back there. We also asked if anybody had signed up for on a streamer while they had been in lockdown. And I think around 47% of people said that they had signed up for a new streamer while they've been in lockdown. But of those 47%, 17% that they said that they would be going back to the movies probably the same as or more than they had before we went into lockdown, which just shows, you know, going to the movies is a community event. People love to be and watching and experiencing a film, storytelling together. So yeah, so all of that was really heartening for us, because I mean, we did do a lot of advertising, we put a lot of money into this town, but we were all very anxious before we went into release. I mean, yeah, we didn't know. We didn't know if people would go. It was all so uncertain, and we just had to, you know, take the bet and be brave about it. So it was great when it turned out to be a wonderful result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I suppose this is a question for everyone, so whoever wants to jump in and answer, do you feel like audiences are, because obviously without the Hollywood releases all coming through as per normal, as we all know, things have been delayed or shifted or moved, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But do you think that there's still not a wide awareness out there that cinemas are open again for business? Do you think that's something that we still have to combat?
Yeah, well, I mean, I didn't even realize that they now had particular days that they were open, you know, and particular kind of timing. You know, they've sort of crunched their schedules. They're only open certain days of the week, so that's pretty massive. Some are probably not open at all because they have to staff them and clean them and, you know, do all of that. So that's quite a big impact, I think. It's, you know, a big change in the landscape of that. Jazz, I was also thinking quite good that the borders are closed. So people who would, I mean, not great, but people who would usually go on holiday probably going to the movies maybe a bit more often, which could help as well. So it's that kind of getting them the awareness of knowing that the films are in the cinemas, and then yeah.
I mean, the upside of COVID, the benefit is that New Zealand films got wider releases than they would have, right, Luke? We were putting them in more cinemas, and we stayed at cinemas for longer, because the average time that a New Zealand film usually stays in the cinema is around 2 to 3 weeks. So this town was in cinemas for how long, Luke? How long, David? Can you remember?
Oh.
Still in some places.
No, it's after.
Okay. So 8 weeks. How long were you? Yeah. But yeah.
You also had that weirdness of like Auckland coming back in halfway through, or like not having them and having them.
Yeah.
I think that's another interesting point there, is that Auckland is the biggest, you know, Auckland had 2 lockdowns, and Auckland is the biggest kind of market.
It's 40% of the theatrical market.
Yeah.
So
all of the results that we've had, and, you know, for the last couple of New Zealand films have all been super Wellington happy.
Right.
Yeah, I think for Baby Done, which is in release now, I think Wellington sits in the top 5 of all cinemas. It's Wellington that's turning up for those films.
Is that also, do you think that's also because cinemas in Auckland, sort of some of them are, not as many of them are open?
I don't know. What do you think? Because indie cinemas, you see, it's expensive to open a complex. The 10-screen cinemas cost a lot of money to open, and we don't have a complex in Wellington City. So we've got the Lighthouse and the Embassy. I mean, what do you think, Luke? Interrupted you.
I mean, one of the things, you know, one of the big results from the exit survey that we found, you know, people were concerned about the restrictions on sessions and times and everything like that. And I don't think that maybe the exhibitors have done enough to actually explain that to people.
Yeah, I think there's definitely an element of that. They're just struggling for their survival, and they haven't necessarily communicated well. I think that the exhibitors, the cinemas that have done really well, are the ones that already had quite personalized engagement with their audiences, either via you know, their Facebook pages or their newsletters or whatever. And they've been able to communicate really effectively, whereas the bigger chains don't necessarily have that personalization. So that hasn't come across.
And I guess they're also in damage control because a lot of their business is those blockbuster films, the international ones that are all being postponed or held back, or Disney streaming them on their own platforms. You know, that's really kind of impacting the landscape.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the big local chains as well, we've seen job losses even at the local level for those guys. So they're fighting for their survival. Not to say that little guys aren't, but with the big chains, it's probably a bit more obvious to see what's happening with them. So they just don't have that head office support anymore that they previously had, and trying to run New Zealand cinema from Australia, particularly with a ton of New Zealand films in play that they don't know anything about in Australia, is very, very difficult, I would say. So the localized, personalized way of doing things seems to have been the way to go this year. And if they haven't capitalized on that, then it hasn't worked so much, I would say.
So I have a question for you, Jazz, if I'm allowed to ask a question, Jill. Just with the NZFC and kind of the views, I guess, on it within the building, and on the flexibility of kind of how films are now distributed, you know, kind of embracing the new way of distributing.
With COVID. Yeah, because so we do have in the COVID-19 policy that the Commission brought in, I think around about August, September, was that New Zealand films that are either in production, post-production, or about to be released can, the theatrical requirement for a theatrical release can be waived, and that's going to remain in place till July next year. Because next year is going to be really interesting, because all the studios have moved all their blockbusters to next year. It's just going to be blockbuster after blockbuster after blockbuster release. So that's going to be tough for New Zealand films to work out how they're going to draw their audiences in and stand out from all of those big releases. Because, you know, we've got entertainment dollar. People don't have an unlimited amount of money to spend on going to the cinemas. So that's a massive thing which we're already thinking about and wondering how we're going to kind of support cinemas and distributors and the producers in that environment next year. Currently on our schedule, we've got 10 films to release, New Zealand films to release in 2021 that we're involved with. And I just look at the horror every time I see Disney moves a film. Films again.
Speaking of horror, I was reading that Warner Brothers, you know, their film Contagion, that was released like years ago, like when, 2011 or something, and it was like the 240th most watched film, you know, Warner Brothers most watched film, and then in 2020 it became the second most watched film, because everybody's like hopping on to, you know, do some research on pandemics.
I know. What does our future look like?
Some of those, maybe we should be re-releasing them. That's pulling the crowds.
So in talking about that the thing we've seen of Mulan as the greatest example of being New Zealand kind of focused, with Nikki Caro directing and so many of the cast and crew here and so much of the shoot here, obviously that going away from cinemas and going straight to Disney Plus was a big blow to New Zealand audiences. And it looks as if Disney are planning that for a few more, and the other studios have, I think, all universally moved at least a couple of releases straight to streaming platforms. So what are people's thoughts on how that's going to change things moving forward, or has already changed things, I suppose?
Yeah, well, I was reading also that Wonder Woman is apparently, there's some deal there with Disney too, so Disney's releasing Wonder Woman on
it's not 100% yet, so fingers crossed, no, but we'll see.
Right. I mean, interesting. It's you know, it's good for people like me when you have a lot of family and you can just buy it and it's $3 each and we can all sit in the lounge room and watch the movie. But I miss going to the cinema. I miss the experience of the big screen. There's stuff that I definitely want to watch there, and I know Tenet is controversial subject on whether or not the film's good or not, but I watched it on the big screen and loved it, and I still think there are lots of films that should be. I feel sad for Mulan. I think that it needed a big screen
agree.
release. Just shout out to Yoson and Xana Tang, like doing it for the Kiwis. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like it will be sad if we don't have, if cinemas fade away.
Yeah, it's really actually just to do with money. Let's be honest. It's like they need those films to survive. They won't survive on New Zealand content alone. And it's like every week, you just have to look at it. It's like every week they need another film to come in to keep those doors open. And slowly those regional cinemas will die if we don't get those content in and it goes to streamers. And you can see that happening over the world. And so it's actually quite frightening.
Yeah, there was a survey that came out last year from Australia with roughly 60% of the regional cinemas saying that they don't know if they're going to survive the next year. And it really does have to do with international Hollywood content as much as like the local stuff.
And the second week of this town, we're getting phone calls from those regional cinemas in Adodoli going, last week we made $90. This week we've made several thousand. Thanks for keeping the film. Or like putting it into the world, and as Jasmin says, it's a scary thing to be that film, the first film out, but it's like you have to stay the course, otherwise a thing that we all hold so dear will die. And it's like, if you're telling me that they were earning, and they were quite big films, like it was David Copperfield and Trolls and things like that, those films, a week before you made $90 over your entire week of your cinema, the only reason that you made money was because of your cafe. Like, that's terrifying. So I think there's this thing for next year, if they keep moving everything to SVOD, it's like, like we can say as much as we want, it'll be great because we get more sessions and we get this and we get that, but they won't be there. So,
I mean, studios that were already beginning to look at hybrid releases, where some of the films they made were going to be online and some were going to be theatrical, and that's why Disney Plus, and we see Amazon's picked up some projects and put them straight onto their platform and stuff. But this is going to be controversial. The exhibition model is kind of outdated for this landscape. The 90-day theatrical window that producers have to wait for. Look at Luke's face. I mean, I think that there really is a conversation for what that model looks like in 2021 for cinemas to survive. I think all of us, everyone who works in film, loves going to the movie, and in some way it was going to a movie as a teenager or a student or as a child that captured the dream or the desire to tell stories on film. And I'm not so sure that you could capture that dream so strongly on an SPOT at home. It's that experience of being in a cinema with lots of people and, and enjoying and experiencing that film together. So, the exhibition model, the release pattern, I think that's a conversation that the industry has to have. It's just not a New Zealand issue. It's something around the world as well. We were all seeing what happened with ANZSA, who did a partnership with Universal for a 17-day release window. So I don't know, and that's going to be a tough conversation.
Yeah. So just to clarify that means that once the film goes to the cinema, 17 days later, it's allowed to go to VOD platforms. So consumers will be able to see that film much faster on their local VOD platform, whatever it may be. And that deal, they've been trying to do that deal for a couple of years, but COVID made it happen in reality, and now it's potentially the future of the business. So that's going to change things a lot. It is incredibly helpful on the marketing side, because it means that as soon as you've spent all this money and all this P&A on a film, then it's going to be available in other places for people to see it very, very quickly afterwards, and you're not losing out on that 3 months that you used to have to wait. But at the same time, there is also the argument that then people just won't bother to see it in the cinema, right?
Well, I think people choose to go and see a cinema. I think people choose whether or not they're going to go and see a film, and whether or not it's a film that they want to see in the cinema on the big screen, or whether it's a film that, I mean, there's some films that would just be an absolute crime, like Tenet. I went and saw that on the big screen, and it needs to be watched on the big screen. James Bond, I think we all want to see James Bond on the big screen. And then there's other films which are fine to watch on the small screen. Boys State, which, you know, Amazon bought at Sundance earlier this year. It was fine for me. I was happy to watch that on the screen at home. But I think that cinemas have a value and a contribution, and I think that they need to have faith in their business model, and that people will continue to go and see films in cinemas.
And what does it mean for the film if it doesn't have a cinema release? What does it mean for the downstream revenue and awareness of the film?
Yeah, it's tougher. It is absolutely tougher, and it's hard. And of course, you don't get the market, you don't get the campaign around going straight to SVOD, you don't get the bus backs, you don't get any of that profile. I'm not sure if Kate Roger will watch your film and review it. So yeah, it's a big it's a big mind change in 2021 for how we release films, and how we release films in a way that producers can make, and distributors and exhibitors can all make money from that. I think that's a big question for 2021 in terms of production as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say, I feel like cinema is, you know, it's experience viewing. Like you're going to have an experience with a community, or to have an experience on the big screen. And so yes, definitely content is king in that case. Like it is going to determine whether people go and watch something at the cinema or not, you know, whatever the film is. But I do think that this has been an evolution that has been coming. I don't feel like it's a big surprise. I think it's just that COVID did push it faster than maybe what people were prepared to accept. And so, yeah, definitely, while I think that exhibitors need really good films to sort of stay alive and keep their business going, I do think that there has to be some kind of partnership and bridging with SVOD, with different ways of releasing films. There has to be some kind of happy marriage, you know, they have to kind of make that work for both of them. But yeah, like you say, Jill, there are some fish hooks. Maybe people just won't bother going because it's coming out in 17 days anyway online, and then we can watch it at home. Yeah, but Luke, you were saying that there's different kinds of marketing now. You guys are doing stuff on TikTok.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we are. I mean, for Baby Done, I mean, that's a very younger skewed film. Yeah, we are. We're doing stuff on Instagram, TikTok. It's just, I mean, I don't know anything about TikTok, but that's what's got to be done now.
But look, you're the one out of all of us who talk to the cinemas on a daily basis. So what's your feeling from them?
About the window?
About the window, and just about how, I mean, business. I know they're going to say business is shit, generally.
Well, yeah.
But yeah, and about the window as well. They're scared, right?
Well, the chains are all freaking out. I mean, if they don't, you know, if Wonder Woman gets pulled, or, you know, some of these other big blockbusters are getting like pushed like far into 2021, they're in trouble.
Yeah.
I mean, they're already laying people off now.
The box office is 62% down on this time last year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Big.
We need to get those New Zealand films out.
Yeah, well, I mean, like David said, though, I mean, that can only do so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, we need the whole breadth of product, much as I hate to call films product.
We're all global now.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you get the feeling, what's your thoughts on the chains, the events, the Hoyts versus the independents? Who do you think has coped best this year?
Well, it has to be the independents. I mean, they at least have product that they'd normally have. Jesus. They at least have films that they would normally have. God, what's going on with product?
You can call it
That's
product.
from marketing.
No, that's the worst. They at least have films that they would usually have. The chains have nothing. I mean, sure, the chains would have Baby Done and Savage in this town, but they're also missing like 80% of the stuff that they would normally have. I mean,
and do you think they're missing a trick by not pivoting as much as they could?
Well, they are pivoting. I mean, they're taking they're taking like Made in Italy wide, or like Rams wide, or I Am Woman wide. I mean, they wouldn't have. Would they think about taking Made in Italy or I Am Woman wide under any normal circumstance? Probably not.
Why don't we ask Mark, who's lurking in the background as a participant? We see you, Mark. We know you're there. You can tell us.
What about festivals, Jill? I mean, just a little conversation around festivals.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess let's start by talking about the New Zealand Film Festival and how different that was this year, obviously, with them having to go primarily to streaming and a VOD system via Shift 72's platform. And then because we were out of lockdown and back open, they ended up doing some in-person physical screenings. Look, how much did that affect what Madman had in the festival and how that operated this year?
Quite a lot. Usually, I don't know, we'd probably give the festival, I don't know, like somewhere in the amount of like 20 to 30 films. And this year we gave them 3.
Because?
Well, I mean, I guess, especially for a New Zealand film, having your film in an online festival like that basically means that no cinema is going to touch it. Like there is zero chance. How Girl on the Bridge got any cinema to take it, I do not know. But that would be the standard. I wouldn't suggest that if it was an online festival that you would do that, because the backlash from cinemas, it would be dramatic.
Yeah. I mean, we found the same thing, that we were getting messages from sales agents who we bought international films from saying, we do not want, and the producers do not want this film to premiere as an online proposition. We would rather you did not put the film in online film festivals. And then equally, lots of the local independent cinemas who would normally take those films afterwards for a release were saying, we will not take that film after if it goes in an online festival. So that really changed up the way that the festival operated for us as an awareness campaign, effectively, for future releases. Which is really, really difficult. And I think the same is true of international festivals, right, Jazz?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. What does that look like going forward then for New Zealand films?
So when it first started, South by Southwest closed, cancelled, as we know, and then we started to see some more festivals come out, and they were going to do CPH Docs was the first to do the hybrid version where they went completely online. And we had, Kerry, your film was invited to film festivals, and the sales agents said no, that they would not agree to the film's screening online because they felt it was too risky. And I did have conversations with separate sales agents who said, there's software you can buy to capture the images on screen, so we're not going to do it, it's too risky. But now what we've found as we've progressed forward, progressed through the months, is that people are a lot more kind of accepting of the fact that the only way that you're going to get a crest for your film is for it to have a degree of to screen in a hybrid film festival. So Toronto, we had Shadow in the Cloud screening in Toronto. We've got a film that's been invited to screen in Sundance, so there's going to be a hybrid version of that as well. We've got a sheet that the Commission sends out to every film festival that invites us now, which essentially it's a checklist for them to complete around what the DRM security is around that. The geo-blocking that's the festival's going to put into place to control it as much as possible. So everybody's getting a little more less paranoid about it, but yeah, in the early days, it was like no.
But do you think that's paranoia more because it's taking so long, this wonderful pandemic we're in, and so there's not really another alternative than to move forward with releasing the films that are completed?
Paranoia and uncertainty. Sales agents didn't understand, because it wasn't screening in a territory, they didn't understand what it meant to the film's status. They also didn't understand what it meant in terms of they did a sale, because, you know, film festivals, especially for indie films, which New Zealand films are, they didn't understand what that meant in terms of the window, the theatrical window to the local distributor. So, you know, if a buyer may say that they couldn't get a theatrical release for the film in their territory because it had been online. So there were all these questions that nobody knew the answers to. Everybody was making it up. And I mean, we are still making things up as we go along. I think that we're all hoping that by the time we get to Cannes next year, that we'll have some kind of answers. But yeah,
that's the takeaway today. We're just making it up.
The takeaway is we've got a vaccine. So yeah.
The takeaway is we've always been making it up. Nothing's changed this year.
That's true.
It's just we're making it up faster as we go along. I read an interesting article this morning in Deadline which said that sales agents are now introducing kill fees into their contracts, where if they've had them previously, but they're really exacting in them now, where they're saying if this film gets sold to a streamer and goes straight to VOD instead of going to theatrical and having that traditional release, then the sales agent will get paid a certain amount of money back on top of what they had originally paid for the film, because basically effectively it makes that film lose a lot of value to them in overseas territories or other markets that they still have the rights for the film on. So I think that's quite a big change, but it was probably coming down the line anyway, given how many films are selling from major A-list festivals to the likes of Netflix and Amazon.
Yeah, we've got a contract at the moment that we're looking at which has kill fees in it, and the kill fee is either 10% of the lowest amount of money. So Jill, they have to agree what the sale price is, the minimum and the maximum sale price for that film, and it's 10% of the lowest fee that they get, or another figure. So yeah.
Wow.
And I guess that's an interesting thing too, because when you have the streamers, you can go straight to the streamer and cut out the sales agent anyway, like in the early stages, you know, when you're pulling together that product. You can just go to a Netflix, you can just go to an Amazon and miss out that middleman.
Yeah, and sales agents are quite terrified about that. And I think that's a change we've seen in the business in the last 2 to 3 years, is that sales agents are much more becoming production companies as well, and getting involved with films really early in the production stage, because otherwise they don't know if they'll have a business in
that's right.
5-10 years time.
In the genre market this year that was online, Jazz, that was one of the biggest takeaways for me, was how interested they all are in coming on board when you're still developing the script. And wanting to be part of the project from then on, and pulling money in, and then going, rather than just an equity position, can we be co-producers on this?
Yeah. So, and I think the same is the case for a lot of distributors as well, wanting to be involved earlier and earlier.
Yeah, and not such a bad thing. You know, with Baron Blow, we had XYZ involved very early, and going over scripts and giving notes, you know, the same with Madman. So, and I found that to be a really good collaborative relationship, because it meant that everyone sort of really knew what the end product was going to be, what they were getting, which was good, you know.
Hey, Jill and Luke, So as distributors, if the market is so, as a filmmaker, if the market is so uncertain, can we just talk about MGs and then also sales agents, international sales agents, and the money? Because, you know, like we all need that money to even get us to the point where we're talking about our distribution.
Yes,
So it's
totally.
like, and that is, it's a complete through line. So if you guys could just talk us through how you guys are feeling about the marketplace when I'm coming to you with a script, with, as we've just talked about, even the chains in New Zealand being a little bit more volatile, and how you're feeling about that stuff. There you go.
Look,
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're still paying MGs. They might not be as large as, well, I mean, for smaller films, we'll probably still pay the same. If you're talking about a big film, maybe not. But we're still paying MGs. I know that like you wanted to know about P&A spend when MGs were lower, didn't you, Jazz?
Yeah, but I think we kind of changed that. But I read in Variety this morning that there's a 40 to 50% drop in MGs for European films because the companies are struggling and they want to keep buying, but they also don't want to have the risk. They can't have the financial risk anymore.
An MG from the sales agent or an MG from the distributors?
From the sales agent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So look, I suppose let's take that back a step.
Yeah.
What are you seeing sales doing for all those other ancillary rights? Things like DVD and VOD and hotel sales and all those things that we used to get money from.
I mean, TV's just terrible right now. Really bad. I mean, you think maybe like TVNZ on demand, you know, the views might be up, but they've lost advertising, so their fees aren't going up. DVDs, I know in Australia they've gone up, but here they're quite flat. I know. I mean, we've got Doc Play. I mean, Rufus is probably watching, might be able to tell you a bit more, but I'm pretty sure that our subscriber numbers in New Zealand have doubled. So, I mean, I don't know, ancillary's kind of all over the place, really.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen this year with ancillary that DVD has increased and VOD has increased. TVOD actually, not SVOD. SVOD stayed about the same because the SVOD platforms still really want international big English language films and don't really care about local films or independent films, which sorry to say that, people, to everyone that thinks Netflix is going to come buy your movie. It's very rare. And we've also seen, as Luke says, TV has been a bit of a disaster this year. It's definitely, sales have gone down across the board with TV, which you wouldn't expect because everyone's been home so much, but because they've lost advertisers, they don't have the money to pay MGs. Also, we've completely lost out on sales that could be quite strong, which are airline sales because nobody's flying, and hotels because nobody's going anywhere, nobody's traveling. So all of those little bits and pieces that used to add up are just gone for now.
You think hotel would go up with the amount of like COVID hotels there are?
True, but everyone's watching Netflix in their hotel room.
Are you realigning your amount of money that you're willing to spend?
So as an MG, do you know what? No,
a little bit, a tiny bit, but not much.
We still, you know, put a budget in for each film as to what we think those sales estimates will look like. Ultimately, for any local film, we want to have not a guarantee of theatrical, but we want to be confident that the film will have a theatrical release. Otherwise, honestly, it's not really worth taking on because a local film is so much work and effort and love and attention and blood, sweat and tears from everyone. So the theatrical release is the most important thing. So if we see a film that we don't think could have that, then I don't think we would consider it. And that's going to be an interesting conversation moving forward with the Film Commission as to whether, you know, if films do go straight to an SVOD platform or whatever, what that means for everybody involved.
Well, I guess that means that basically your sort of new proposition where you can have a sales agent and not a local distributor might come into play, right?
Yeah, and that's only for films under $2.5 million, and it's only during COVID.
Yeah,
So,
so it might change back.
Yeah.
So we'll see if the vaccine works, and then we'll go from there and make it up.
Exactly. But no, David, to answer your question, I think we are fairly confident that things on the theatrical side will stabilise over the coming couple of years, and we're so confident that New Zealand films can have theatrical lives, and in that case we will still offer the same amounts of NGs that we would have previously.
You heard it here first, everybody.
Well, okay, here's just an alternate
And you
view of
still
things. I mean, mostly production is done overseas. People can still make films here. There's, I mean, there's going to be a huge gap between, the already slated overseas films and what can be produced. And that could be just filled in with like local production from a New Zealand, Australia sort of perspective.
Yeah, I mean, we have not found, we've barely got any new films to release from April, May onwards next year, international films.
And Jill, did you have films that you participated in Cannes and virtually? I'm not sure if you're doing AFM, but is the gap because you haven't picked anything up from those markets this year, or is it because the films that you have picked up and had thought that would be delivered to you aren't real anymore?
A couple aren't real anymore and haven't happened. A couple are delayed, and we don't know when they'll shoot, and they might well fall apart and disappear because the financing has disappeared. We generally tend to have a fair few for the film festival. We're not super confident that the film festivals will, what will happen with them next year and whether they'll be physical or digital, and that takes us back to the issues we discussed earlier. So it's finding the right type of film for this environment, and and also I think, if mentioning Cannes this year was really interesting because they selected 75 films, I think, as official Cannes selection. So those films could get the Cannes label, but actually they didn't have to premiere in Cannes if the filmmakers or the sales agents decided they didn't want that online release. And so they're called a Cannes film, but they haven't actually premiered anywhere yet. So we haven't seen them. So a few released in Toronto and Venice, a few released in Cannes, but there's probably about 40 of those that still haven't seen the light of day. So who the hell knows what's going to happen with those? So it's been a very strange year.
Interesting what you were saying, Luke, about production and kind of the rest of the world not necessarily being able to shoot, and New Zealand and Australia being attractive because we can shoot. And then we have the problem of kind of capacity, right? Like if all the international projects are coming into New Zealand, then that puts pressure on the independent, the kind of New Zealand independent productions, because we don't have enough crew to share around, and of course we also don't have the same budgets to be able, they're getting pinched and poached all over the place, which is awesome for them. I mean, they should make money while the sun shines, and they've been going through COVID too, so that's difficult in the landscape for independent film, for New Zealand films. As well,
absolutely.
In terms of how that
David, I'm interested. You wanted to talk, David, about the international sales advances and things as well. So I'm interested from you and Kerry what your experience of that's been this year. Have you, or what have you heard or talked about? Because then we can talk specifically maybe about.
I've got a question for you, Jill, though, before you ask Jazz my question.
You're answering her question with a question.
Are films getting cheaper? Like the ones that you're buying, like that you're in the marketplace, are they getting cheaper to buy for New Zealand and Australia?
No, I can tell you straight up no.
Yeah, he's right. Anything English language, absolutely not. There is still the same demand, there is still the same competition among all of us distributors for a really good English language movie of different genres. I mean, we all talk about that older female audience as a panacea for theatrical release, but actually it's also horror and thrillers that can do really well on VOD platforms. It's lots of different things. So a really, really great film with really great reviews, a good cast, a good director, a good whatever hook is still, I would say, getting the same amount of money. I would say that probably foreign language films and film festival movies, foreign language films tend to be getting a little bit cheaper, but that's been the case for probably 2 to 3 years. So I'm not sure how much this year has impacted that.
Yeah.
If
Interesting.
you have a pandemic film, David, that's doing well. That's
Yeah, no. But you should ask Bez about their international sales, because like I've got one film and she's over all the deals. So
tell us everything. How much is it sold for?
Well, and the difference in pricing, right? Like compared to all of the films is really interesting. So there you go.
Okay, Jazz, go.
Ballparks. What are the ballparks?
Well, New Zealand films in the international marketplace, it varies. It depends on the content. Some films travel easier than others. So comedy is much harder. It's harder for it to travel, especially New Zealand comedy overseas. So we've seen that. We have also seen some hardballs from some sales, some buyers, international buyers, being a bit more hardball on the films that they're picking up. But yeah, so it's a mix for us. We have seen some films which have got very healthy offers. So one has just happened in the past 2 weeks where there's been a really healthy offer for that film, and then other films which haven't done so well in that marketplace. So yeah, it depends. But I don't know that that's a COVID thing, David. I think that just is something that happens all the time. It's that hard look. It's that audience. It's all the things that those buyers weigh up. So yeah.
But I'm interested in the advances from sales agents for films yet to go into production. It seems that from the proposals that SPADA put forward and what the Film Commission has put into place with your COVID terms of trade, that you've taken the requirement away in some cases, or if it's not a big film, because that was becoming much harder this year. So it is obviously being used as an excuse.
You mean sales advances?
Yeah.
Pre-sales, you mean, or MGs from the start? Yeah.
Yeah, but so pre-sales, like before a film goes into production, so to come to the Film Commission for production financing.
Yeah, I mean, pre-sales, I think for a number of years have been harder and harder and harder for sales agents to do. It's still possible if you've got a film with the right cast, the right budget, a clear target audience is really important to them. So, but pre-sales have been problematic for they're hard and tough for people to do. Same with MGs. We see some sales agents come in with no MGs. They come in with just their reputation. And other sales agents do come in with an MG. It's up and down. There's no clear pattern that we can see. It's just that it is generally tough. I mean, sales agents and buyers, just to be clear, international sales agents and buyers I'm talking about, will use any excuse under the sun to pay as little amount of money as they can. Don't ever doubt that. We've
seen it all.
You've seen them all. So yeah. But I mean, at the moment, New Zealand, the Film Commission's has funded films, and I think we've got 10 films either in early post-production, so they've just completed filming, so they've started early post-production, or filming at the moment, so in production, or in early pre-production. So what this means, like in 12 months' time, we're going to have content which is ready to go, ready for market, fresh content, which I hope will be good for the producers and good for sales coming through this time next year. Yeah.
And do you feel like things are changing in the international market in terms of the sales agents, like people, companies disappearing and changing and people moving on? And...
I mean, this is the thing with these questions they're hard to answer because we actually haven't been in the market since September. I haven't been to a market since September last year. So it's tough because so much of what you learn about what's happening with businesses and with the industry and what people are buying or interested in is from conversations that you have, casual conversations where you run into people afterwards or have dinner with them. You don't get that. You don't get that intel from reading a trade magazine, which I do, which I'm reading more than I ever read, but you still don't get that behind the scenes market gossip, if you will, for want of a better word. So, but there has definitely been a lot of people have moved out of their jobs or gone to new companies. A lot of companies have downsized, definitely. I was reading in Screen International this morning that, a lot of those sales, it cost a lot of money to go to a market. And because of COVID and what's happened, they're doing a lot of stuff hybrid. They will be re-looking at how many people and how they attend markets next year. There's a lot of markets. I don't know how many markets there are in the world, but if you wanted to, you could go attend a market around the world in normal terms every week and an event. So sales agents are going to be re-looking at those models as well. But yes, I think there's a lot of shift, but it's hard to keep an eye. It's hard for me to keep a handle on it because I'm not in the market and I'm not, you're just reading things that's all in bits and pieces. Whereas normally, Jill will have this as well. You have market friends who you get together at the end of the market and you actually talk about what's happened in the market and who bought what and how much. And that's where we get a lot of our information is from those relationships, those one-to-one relationships that we have in the marketplace.
Yeah, I had a call with a London-based sales agent yesterday morning, and they said that because lockdown made them realise that everyone could work from home, and it just wasn't actually, there wasn't much point in having an office in central London anymore, and they could all come in and out for meetings if they needed. So they've got rid of their office, which was 150 grand a year.
Wow.
So from their perspective, they said, actually, that's great because we can spend it on films and we can spend it on products. And so they're excited about that because they've discovered it's an opportunity they didn't know was there before. So I think you're right. People are going to be second guessing everything they spend and where they travel to. It's going to be interesting to see if markets like AFM, which is on right now, does even survive, because people are just, I think, waking up to the fact they don't need to be at every single market face to face all the time.
I think the hybrid version is here to stay, which is good for us because, so I attended the Tokyo Film Festival. I would never go to Tokyo, but I attended the festival remotely, and that was fantastic, and I'm for a study and I'm attending it for remotely as well. So, but nothing beats that one-on-one meeting that you have with people in the marketplace, and nothing beats the buzz that you hear about a film that has screened in the marketplace and to hear what other buyers are saying about that film. So, I think everybody's waiting for Cannes next year and hoping that we'll all be able to travel and be back in Cannes.
It's interesting, Jazz, because the online markets that I've been participated in and been part of have actually been really interesting because I do think that there's a hustle and bustle of the market that, is exciting on the ground. But something that I found this time around doing markets online was being able to grow quite a personal relationship with with the people that I was talking to, being able to spend time, you know, like set aside a time that wasn't necessarily in the schedule of a market.
Yeah.
And have half an hour to 40 minutes to an hour with some of them, just really talking about what we like, what we enjoy, what the films, you know, really getting a feel for one another. And I found that those relationships have really stuck through having, you know, like we touch base with one another once a month, you know, we kind of keep those relationships going. And I've kind of enjoyed that. You know, I've experienced both, being at the market on the ground and then doing it this way, and, you know, the new COVID way, sort of before COVID and after COVID. And I think there are pros and cons to both.
Yeah, agree.
You know, I didn't have jet lag to see someone for 15 minutes or see a row of 10 people for 15 minutes each in the freezing cold and, you know, wherever I was. Or although it's, like I say, the hustle and bustle of the market is nice, and you sort of see new things, but it was really nice to carve out time and really understand people on a personal level and be able to connect with them about a global pandemic, like, yeah. You know, so that's been interesting too, in terms of how we're working with one another, and that it isn't just
definitely pros and cons, but you know, we're finding out about
some trauma bonding, you know?
Trauma bonding.
I think from my perspective with markets, the one really good thing this year has been that I have actually been able to watch way more films from start to finish. Because normally our schedule will be so packed with meetings with all the sales agents that we go in and see 20 minutes of a film and then have to leave and run off to a meeting or whatever, because we don't have the luxury of Madman, who have 5 people at a market at a time. So
usually I'm the grunt that watches all the films.
Exactly.
I don't get to go to a meeting.
You're the lucky one.
But what's it like negotiating, Jill? Is it like, because normally you all get into the office, into the sales room and push people, lock people in cupboards and stuff. I mean, how does that go? How does that feel different?
No, because to be honest, so many negotiations that actually happen over text or WhatsApp these days, or quick calls here, there, and everywhere in between meetings. So
TikTok now, you never know.
Yeah, maybe I should get on TikTok. Maybe that's where I'm missing out.
That's where Luke's doing all his deals.
So yeah, it's been really great to see more movies, and I've loved that. It's just that there haven't been as many movies to watch as normal. So
yeah, well, that's right. Like
swings and roundabouts. Okay, I did just want to, we haven't really talked much about Australia, and given that our distribution world does also encompass Australia, we should probably talk a bit about that. So Luke, you have released all of the recent films in Australia as well, theatrically?
Not David's, to his utter disdain.
Chagrin. Oh dear.
And not this town.
Yeah, he just said that. Sorry.
And I mean, David, you're in good company. Barrenthal, you know.
One day.
You got one day.
we got half a day.
Maybe you could tell us about that decision process, Luke. Just kind of throw some light on that.
I mean, it's a completely different territory, and you know, they'll release what they think is going to work. I mean, at the end of the day, these are financial decisions. If I really can't speak that much to that. It's a different theatrical team. They make those decisions. I mean, I think all of these films should be released in both territories, but I'm not on the ground in Australia, so I don't know realistically what that looks like.
Yeah. And Savage has released and Baby Dunn has released, I understand. Yeah. And they've done okay?
Yeah. I mean, the only film that I can really remember doing really well in Australia was Breaker Uppers. It did more in Australia than it did here. Well, that never happens usually.
Yeah.
Usually the Australian take on a New Zealand film's a fraction.
Yeah. I mean, we normally have the same thing. It's very, very hard to convince Australian exhibitors to take on a New Zealand film. And especially if you're trying to do it around the same time. But I think you're right. It's they'll take a picky film, but they won't necessarily look at anything else because they've had that experience with Wilder People and Breaker Uppers. And so...
Yeah.
Well, they took Baron Twits, just that COVID happened.
But how many screens was that looking at? Because I wonder about the the level of release as well. So
yeah, good question. Was it like 50, 60 screens?
Interesting.
Which is reasonable. Yeah. So it can be frustrating because here we seem to see more Australian films at the New Zealand box office than they see New Zealand films at the Australian box office.
Do we though?
I think it's really interesting.
Do we see that many?
I think that it's a very volatile market at the moment in Australia, and it's like they're still in lockdown in some places and they're not in others. Like I know for this town, we've just done a couple of big deals for SPOD and stuff like that, and actually financially, it's probably better for my life, weirdly, for us because the MG for Australia, because you can't cross collateralize. Thanks, Film Commission, rock and roll. But it wouldn't have mattered because we're in profit. So I will actually see money back, and those SPOD deals that we're getting now and the DVDs, like I will see money from that. And so
great.
I think there's a thing here we need to talk about, which is like when you're thinking about distributing a film, it is about how much money we can make. And it's like, we talked about this, it's like premieres, when you go into those meetings with Luke and Andrew and that team, it's like, how do I make the most money out of my film now? Like, it's all very lovely that I've made it. It's very great, but hey, I need to pay my rent. And so I think with Australia, the volatility of that market and the expense, like let's not forget, it costs a huge amount more money to distribute a film in Australia than it does for New Zealand.
Yeah.
I don't know this, Jasmin.
100%.
Yeah, but there's no extra marketing costs for a distributor in Australia, right? Do you give them?
No, we don't.
A fund.
Yeah,
no.
On that distributor.
And Screen Australia don't either, do they?
Yeah, so it's a pretty, like when you're looking at it from that point of view, it is a cold, hard truth about it. And we just know that when you look at the cold, hard numbers, probably the traction wasn't there. And you're seeing that now with a couple of those films in the Australian marketplace, that it will be very tough for them. And I think even they're in a much worse situation than New Zealand is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this week, finally, Victorian cinemas opened yesterday or on Monday. So they're back open again. And Victoria is like, I think 30% of the Australian market. So that's wonderful that they're up and opening. But whether people actually go back quickly, because they've been closed down for 100 days, or more than that, I think. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly people do filter back into cinemas. And go.
I think the thing with the Australian market is that you can get extremely good money from TV sales there. Extremely good. Yeah. If you do a sale to Stan, you're talking about a lot.
Yeah. So I think Transmission, and Mark, who might be lurking and listening, Transmission actually did that with a couple of their films, which were supposed to release theatrically this year. And then I know that True History of the Kelly Gang went straight to Stan, which is the SVOD platform over there. And they sold it to them for a significant amount and bypassed the theatrical release. And then that film released here in the New Zealand International Film Festival and then ran its course. So, I think we haven't had that experience in New Zealand of a New Zealand film going and getting a big SVOD deal, but we have seen it in Australia because they have the SVOD platforms to actually put that money up and to make that a viable option. But in New Zealand, we just don't have that yet.
No.
But it might come in the future.
I mean, perhaps, Neon might get one day to a level where they can start doing that, but they're not there yet.
Yeah, exactly. Hey, we've got about 5 minutes left to chat, and then we're going to go into questions. So I'm just saying, if anybody who is watching and listening, if anyone wants to ask any questions, please start putting them into the chat. and we can answer what we can. Is there anything that you guys think we should have covered that we haven't? I feel like we've gone over a lot and everything's kind of unpredictable. Difficult, but
just on your point about streamer platforms, Jill, is because surely, like all the streamers at the moment are run out of the US. You know, surely there must be coming in the next 5 years a streamer platform that's either going to be run out of Asia or Australasia that is going to be focused and picking up on content from New Zealand and from Australia.
Well, I mean, Netflix finally have people in Singapore.
Yeah,
don't they have an Australian office too?
They have someone in Australia for production. So she's looking at Australian productions, not New Zealand productions, as we have been told quite categorically at this point. But there's someone in Singapore who is buying for Australia, New Zealand, which has happened in the last month or two. They were in LA before that team. So they're slowly moving slightly closer to us. We've got a question from Kim. I'll just start on that. Anyone got a take on the European market?
What's that mean?
Well, I mean, I guess the only interaction that I've had with any of the sort of European is, I mean, when we were redating Savage 8,000 times, Vertigo in the UK had kind of like sniffed out a little window for it. Was it? I think they wanted to go like pre-Tenet, and we actually had to make them move like twice, I think. But apart from that, I don't know. I mean, I think both of us, Jill, are like pretty much just Aus New Zealand, right?
Yeah, I mean, from what I can tell, the UK had its worst ever box office this past weekend because England went back into lockdown. They had a total, their number one film at the box office took a total of £51 or $102 because there are about 6 cinemas left open in Scotland. So, you know, that's not a positive story. France has been really positive and really strong throughout, but again, they've just gone into a stronger lockdown. So I think over the next couple of months, we're going to see the European market drop and the theatrical box office drop. I think everyone is just a bit wary of, you know, what's happening.
I agree. And I think so next year in Europe, they're going to, I think the regulations kick in, which requires the streamers to reinvest, I think 20 to 30% of production funding back into the local industry. So that's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out. And Brexit also comes, when the whole, that's going to be interesting as well to see what happens when that all kind of, and COVID, so who knows, Kim, who knows what's going to happen with the European market, but definitely, the cinemas are closed in Germany and in France.
Oh dear. So on that downer note, how about
thanks, Jill.
How about we all mention something positive that has come out of your release this year, or that you think is positive for the industry moving forward?
Well, what's positive for me is that it hasn't turned me off making films. That's like, I'm still working with writers, I'm still looking to finance things, I'm still talking to sales agents and distributors who are interested and keen, and you know, building those relationships. And the type of content that I make is you know, Indigenous voices or marginalized voices, or you know, it's Māori content, it's Pacific content, and we kind of had that fight already anyway. So in some ways it's like, oh yeah, business as usual. You know, so I'm kind of like, the cup's still half full. I'm still happy to do all of that mahi and make those stories. And I actually do think that those stories are even more so important now. Those stories are, a lot of them, rooted in connection to whenua, you know, connection to land, connection to environment, in whatever way we choose to tell those stories, whether it's, you know, documentary right through to kind of drama and genre, and however we want to tell those stories, they're still engaging and important. And yeah, I mean, it's hard to make a film for everyone. I definitely agree with that, but I do think that it's been a battle for us in many different ways, many more challenges, and so yeah, I'm still excited to make that work and work with those writers and tell those stories.
Thank you, Kerry.
Yeah,
and my positive uptake is that people like Kerry and David do want to continue to make films, so that's great, because that's the most important
David?
thing. He does. And also, you know, we've got all those films that I mentioned there in various stages of production, so we're going to have some new stuff coming through for the market this time next year. And we're had films are coming in for consideration for production funding for this board meeting in December. So people are still feeling really positive. We know from David's film and from Savage and from Baby Done that New Zealanders love going to the cinema to see New Zealand films, and they're really supportive. I think last time we tested, which was in June, 77% of New Zealanders said that New Zealand films were really important to them. So we've still got their backing. And so, yeah, I think there's a lot to look forward to, but it's very fluid. But Kiwis are good at pivoting, and we've got our number 8 wire mentality runs in through our veins. So I think we're in a good position to be able to, and there's a vaccine coming, guys.
pivoting on the netball court, pivoting in the film industry, you know, just all the pivots all over the place. Everyone.
What about you, David?
Netball.
I got a text message after the second week or whatever it was, when it was the sound was doing so well, and it was from Sam Scott, who does the music for my film, and he said, did you ever think a mockumentary romantic comedy about murder would work? And I was like, yeah. But what I was so heartened by is that as long as you can find an entertaining story that people are willing to, in whatever way you want to tell it, people will come out. And it's a really nice thing to say you can push the boundaries of cinema still in this country, and people will embrace it and love it and care for it. And I think that's the thing. It's like, we need to, as New Zealanders have always done, keep that pushing of the form and making something great. And like, that's the beauty of having also the Film Commission and the distributors letting you take those risks. And sometimes they really work out. So that is my positive about filmmaking and audiences.
Thanks. Luke?
I don't know. I guess
you can do it.
I guess mine is kind of like semi-covered by Jazz and David anyway. I mean, the fact that Savage and Baby Done and This have all made, like, you know, really good money in very difficult situations. I mean, you know, David's film was completely restricted after like a week. Savage was completely annihilated by, you know, nothing being open for all of the like run up to it. And, you know, Baby Done had problems with that too, but they're all making good money. It just means that people actually do really want to see New Zealand films.
Great, thank you. I have another question that's come through, which is from Arthur, which is, what is your point of view as distributors about theatrical windows in the digital era? What the future should be? Are we allowed to answer this?
This is the trickiest question of all, really. Jazz already got a bit controversial on it earlier with this one. I think the problem with the theatrical window has always really come from the exhibitor side of things, because they do want to protect that. And I understand why. But I think that through this COVID process, I think we're now getting to a point where exhibitors know that they have to change. This window is going to have to shorten. I just don't see any other way around it.
Yeah, but we have to come up with a model, don't we, that protects the exhibitor and but also returns money to the distributor and the filmmaker.
Well, that's going to be the interesting discussion about this window, is what is the window going to be going forward? Or how long is it going to be? Because it's not going to be 90 days.
The Universal deal with AMC actually gives a portion of the money that comes in from the VOD sales to the cinemas for allowing that window to close. And whilst I understand that in principle, because the cinemas have always had the power in those relationships, I'm not sure that I actually believe in that as a long-term solution, because it's still giving these cinemas the power when it should be, we should all be more aligned and along one line rather than this pyramid of power there.
And there's the most controversial take of the day. Jill is going to get mobbed now.
Right? Yeah, I just feel like the cinemas...
Nice knowing you, Jill.
Yeah, I know. Cinemas still expect to maintain the power that they've had for this whole time. And I'm not sure that the industry as a whole is going to put up with that for too much longer. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. But my point is, we down here in New Zealand can do nothing about that. That comes from Hollywood, that comes from the US, and we just have to wait for that to happen.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's happening with Universal and AMC now just makes it an inevitability.
Yeah.
Do you reckon France has got what, 36-month window?
I mean, that's ridiculous.
Before it goes to Netflix, before it goes to SPAD, they've got a 36-month window. Yeah. Hence all the Cannes controversy and why a Netflix film can't be in Cannes competition anymore.
Yeah, and it is kind of holding on. I think it is that interesting thing about nostalgia, but about wanting to force people to have the same sort of desire to watch everything in the cinema and be a cinephile and be sort of purist about it. But it has been changing for a long time, and some people are much more reluctant to let go than others,
Yeah, I mean, I personally love going to the movies, and I love that immersive experience, and nothing will ever replace that, no matter how big my TV is at home or how good my sound system is. It's just not the same, and so I don't want to see that disappear. So whatever we can do to preserve that, then I think we will, because I think the proposition is different to audience members as well. I don't think audiences view those two things in the same way, and I think the cinemas have to actually trust in themselves that they are, they're there for they exist for a reason, and people
and that they offer something that watching at home doesn't offer. But I think that rather than sort of dig your heels in and stick your head in the sand, it's about going, actually, how can we be collaborative in the approach going forward? That's kind of the that's the future, really. Otherwise, it will be left behind, and nobody wants to see that happen, I don't think.
None of us do, anyway. I don't think.
I don't want to.
No, but the models are changing. They have been changing for several years, and this year has just accelerated that, I think. And so the future is going to be different, and we just have to roll with the punches, as we always have in this industry,
But theatrical is so important to the income to kick the income off. So, I think that's the big crisis question is, how do productions make films that return money to all the investors, including the filmmakers themselves, in an environment where we may not have that theatrical buy-in?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
How do we do that?
And we're really lucky in New Zealand. We're really lucky to have the Film Commission. You know, we're really lucky to have New Zealand on air, because
yes, you are.
most places don't have funding bodies, right? Who you know, that are supported in that way. So we are, yeah.
But yeah, we're lucky to have. We're lucky.
Round of applause for Jasmin.
Alrighty, Ness is coming back in, so we're being told to shut up. That's dead on 90 minutes. Well done, everyone. We did it.
It doesn't seem like we've got more questions coming through, and it does feel like that's a really good place to end. So thank you to each of you for your time and your honesty and your insight, and also to our friends at the Australia and New Zealand Screen Association for supporting this specific SPADA Masterclass to happen.